Hello and welcome, I'm Oles Garjuk and you're watching Head to Head with UATV. The United States said it would slap 10% tariffs on European-made Airbus planes and 25% duties on European goods as punishment for illegal EU aircraft subsidies. The announcement came after the World Trade Organization permitted the retaliation over a long-running dispute between aircraft makers Airbus and Boeing. To talk more about this issue, we welcome to our studio today Dmytro Yefremov, Chief Analyst of the Center for International Studies at Diplomatic Academy of Ukraine at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Hello and thank you for joining us.
Good evening.
So, trade confrontations between Europe and the United States have been going on for a few years now. In your opinion, why did Trump decide to tighten these trade sanctions against Europe right now?
Well, it is long-standing Donald Trump foreign policy and trade policy. His main objective is that trade deficit between the EU and the US is expanding, and now it is more than $160 billion. And for example, 7 or 8 years ago, it was just 2 times lower. And the European Union members also provide for the American president some reasons to introduce different tariff and other trade limitations. For example, during the summer, French President Emmanuel Macron proposed to introduce a 3% tax on digital services that are...
on the US's digital services?
Yes, mostly American companies, as it is well known, provide these digital services for European citizens. They are Facebook, Amazon, and other high-tech companies. So the idea of the French president was to find some additional finances and to collect them to European budgets. So he proposed this additional tax, and the answer of the United States was the opposite one.
So the idea was supported about the 3% or not?
It was supported in the European Union, but not by the American president.
Okay, so what was the answer from the US then?
There were different answers, but all the time Donald Trump said that they would impose additional tariffs to retaliate this rival trade policy from the European side.
So let's get into this dispute between the Airbus and Boeing, because let's just explain the audience that these 25% of duties would affect the French wine, Scotch and Irish whiskies, as well as cheese from across the continent. And as I said in the introduction, additional 10% tariffs on Airbus planes made in France, Britain, Germany, and Spain. These 4 countries produce these aircrafts. So could you please explain us what happened between Boeing and Airbus, and what does this illegal subsidizing mean in this case?
I think everyone knows that Boeing and Airbus are the main producers of airliners all over the world. So they compete strongly, and the governments of both sides try to support their producers. And as far as WTO forbids to apply some sorts of tariffs to protect national producer, both countries tried to help their national producers by proposing them additional subsidies. And as the United States and the European Union, they both accused each other that they provide illegal subsidies, and that they brought this case to the WTO arbitration, and WTO few weeks ago proclaimed that the truth was on the US side, and the United States can request the compensation from the European Union for this illegal subsidizing, and this compensation amounted for $7.5 billion. So the US exposed additional tariff taxes on the goods from the EU
worth of $7.5 billion.
You have mentioned before.
But at the same time, from the world media, we know that in the first half of 2020, the European side is also anticipating the ruling of the WTO arbitrary about the illegal subsidizing of Boeing. So that's the story to be continued, as far as I understand. But could you please comment, how does Europe plan to retaliate, or how does Europe addresses this issue right now?
Well, for the European Union, the situation currently is a little bit tricky, because the United States threatened them that if the European Union would try to retaliate, they would apply such a unusual approach, which we can call carousel changes of tariff rates. It means that they would, in the list of the goods they want to tarifficate,
like roller coaster
yes,
tariffs.
they would all the time change the positions and tax rates. So it would bring some uncertainty into the European exports, and it would make a harmful effect on their trade.
But at the same time, of course, European Union might face some financial difficulties after these tariffs will be imposed. But what retaliatory measures are they think of?
Okay, officially, the head of European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, provided the guiding rules for new commissioner designated Phil Hogan to follow WTO rules. But she also requests him to find solutions for those points where the WTO rules does not work well. They are subsidies, they are forced transfer of technologies, they are also e-commerce rules, and by the way, she asks him to find some way to apply sanctions to those countries who violate WTO rules, and find some unreasonable justification for not following the WTO rules, which are the United States undermined.
So this would threaten United States directly.
It could threaten, but on the other way, it is like a place for mutual conflict, because the United States is taking a strong position, and the EU is going to protect their national exporters.
So now it looks like the United States is stepping, or has already stepped into another trade war, not only with China, but now with the European Union. What can this mean for the global economy and for the upcoming year?
For sure, it would decrease the rates of global trade growth, and that would bring the decrease of the global GDP growth. Why is it so? Because rules would be broken, and the current policy of the United States administration is to avoid multilateral approach of solving trade issues, investment issues and others, and to reorganize it in a bilateral way, and to find new and underwrite new agreements with other countries all over the world. For example, a few days ago it was announced that they would underwrite a new trade agreement with Japan, and inside it, it is not comprehensive, it is shallow one, and if we would look at the positions inside this trade agreement, it opens a Japanese market for the US agricultural goods that previously were exported to China, and now China markets are closed. And in answer, United States would not impose additional tariffs on Japanese cars exports from Japan to the United States. So they find, the United States, they force their policies to force other countries to underwrite new agreements outside of WTO rules.
And you mean that now it will be a focus on bilateral agreements more than multilaterals?
For sure, and it would bring a lot of instability. And we can even apply this approach to the United States-China negotiations. They are continuing for a long time, and currently we see that the most obvious final point would be decoupling of both economies, because it is doubtful that they would come to an agreement and find the situation, the proportion that both sides are interested in.
How could this change that you foresee for the upcoming year probably could reflect on Ukraine and Ukraine's economy and probably on the currency exchange rate?
Well, for the Ukraine economy, it would be a long-standing effect. It would come maybe in 1 year or 2 years, and mostly it would be followed by the overall global decrease in trade levels. As far as our economy is highly export-oriented, almost 50% of our GDP is exported and then imported other goods for this money. So Ukraine's economy could be one of the most that would be would suffer losses from this situation.
So we could be affected the most.
One of the most.
And what about the currency exchange rate?
If our exports would decrease faster than our imports, for sure it would create some difficulties for our trade balance and balance of payments equilibrium, and after this we would see the devaluation of our national currency. But it is like a bad scenario, and it is highly connected to the overall global economy situation. Currently, most famous and influential international organizations change their forecasts and say that in a nearby future the rate of growth would decrease, but still it would be positive.
Are we empowered to change this situation anyhow, not to be so much damaged in case the scenario that you foresee will actually take place? How can Ukraine strengthen its
Well, as far as
economy?
our economy is very weak, we have weak bargaining ability. We cannot negotiate equally with huge countries all over the world, such as the United States, China, Russian Federation, and also the European Union. So our outcome could be like increasing bilateral relations with other countries, especially those where our exports goes mostly. It's like MENA region and also Middle East and Central Asia.
Well, thank you so much for your analysis. Also, the forecast doesn't really sound promising for the next year, but thank you so much for your interesting comments, and thank you for being a guest today in the studio.
You're welcome.
That was Dmytro Yefremov, Chief Analyst of the Center for International Studies at Diplomatic Academy of Ukraine at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Thank you for watching Head to Head, and stay tuned for more with UATV.